goal is to be able to solve for missing pieces of a triangle using our new trig functions of sine, cosine, and tangent. The beginning of this lesson here, I'm giving you a setup problem. So when we solve these and set them up ourselves, this is what it'll look like at the end. So I'm going to start by showing you how to find x here, so that when we apply them to the triangles, you've already seen this at least twice. So what I need you to think of is sine of 54 is actually a number. This is just a really big fancy number. Now, in your calculator, that'll give you a really big decimal. We don't want to deal with decimals before we have to. So I'm going to treat that sine of 54 as a set. So if I need to isolate x, I have to get it out of the denominator. I never want a variable in the denominator. So for me to get it out of the denominator, I have to multiply both sides by x. That's kind of hard to read out here. What that allows this to become is this side becomes x times sine of 54, while this side over here, x divided by x is 1. So those x's actually cancel out, and I'm just left with the 3. Do you see how that got the x out of the denominator? That's exactly what I'm looking for. Now, all I need to do is get rid of this sine of 54. This is multiplication, so I'm going to divide by the sine of 54 to both sides. The sine of 54s are going to cancel out, and I'm going to be left with x equals. Now, you're going to put this entire thing into your calculator just like that. So if you type that into your calculator, 3 divided by sine of 54, you should get 3.7. Well, it's actually 3.708203, blah, 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 right? So we can round it. And that's exactly why you want to wait and do any of that with the decimals until the very end, because your number is always going to be irrational. So we really don't want to do that until the very end. Part A is your more complicated solving. Part B is your easier solving because the x is already in the numerator. So in order to isolate it, all we have to do is get rid of that 5. So if it's being divided by 5, the inverse is to multiply both sides by 5. So we get 5 times cosine of 35 equals x. And now all I've got to do is put that in my calculator. And I end up with x equals, and this is, if we round it, 4.1. On this page of notes, I'm just rounding to the nearest tenth on all of them. So just to stay consistent, just expect 1 decimal place. So what are the steps for solving for a missing leg of a right triangle? We're going to skip that for now. I want to do 2 examples, so that way when I do write the steps, they'll make a little bit more sense. So let's look at number 3. Here's my triangle. I'm trying to find this side right here. So according to what we've learned, what side would that be? So if this is my angle, this side would be considered my opposite side. This side would be considered my hypotenuse side. And this side would be my adjacent side. But I don't know my adjacent side. That's going to come into play later. So which of those trig functions do you think I can use? Let's check them all and let's see which one makes sense. Remember, I'm going to have sine, which is opposite over hypotenuse, or I could have cosine, which is adjacent over hypotenuse, or I could have tangent, which is opposite over adjacent. So let's set these up. If I were to use sine, I would use x over 8.7. If I were to choose cosine, it would be question mark over 8.7. If I were to use tangent, it would be x over question mark. So think about which one of those is actually going to give us what we need. Look at tangent. one has an X and one has a question mark. I don't have any way of figuring out what either of those pieces are. So it doesn't make sense to choose tangent as our function. Look at cosine. This one's question mark over 8.7, which is doable. I could find question mark, but am I solving for question mark or am I solving for X? So since this one doesn't have an X, there's no point in solving that one either. So the function that we want to use is sine, because we have one of the numbers and the other part is what we're solving for. So now that I've decided that my function is sine, I can set up the equation. So it becomes sine of 40 equals X over 8.7. And now we're trying to isolate X. So I got to get rid of the 8.7 by multiplying both sides by 8.7. So I get X equals, and then I'm typing this part into my calculator. So 8.7 times sine of 40 should give you 5.6. Now be sure to double check that your calculator is in degrees. If it's in radians, your answer is going to be wrong. So make sure that you're checking that. Let's do another example. Look at number 4. Here's my angle of 22. So this side here would be my opposite side, which I don't have. Then I have my hypotenuse over here. And then this one must be my adjacent side. So if we were to choose our sine, cosine, or tangent, which one has the pieces that I want? Well, I don't have the opposite side, so immediately that takes away those two options. So this is a function where I'm going to use cosine. So cosine of 22 equals, and then this would be adjacent, which is 15, over hypotenuse, which is X. So now we get to solve for X. So I can't solve for X when it's in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply both sides by X. So I get X cosine of 22 equals 15. But now I need to get rid of the cosine of 22. So I'm going to divide by it. And I get left with X equals 16.2 feet. I should have been putting units. Okay, so now you've seen me do 2 examples. So let me actually go and write the steps that you can follow no matter what. So in both examples, the very first thing I did was to identify the parts. So I've got to identify the opposite side, the adjacent side, and the hypotenuse side. This allows me to do step 2, which is to pick the correct function, which is going to be sine. So that's sine. Cosine, which is adjacent over hypotenuse. And then tangent, which is opposite over adjacent. Once you've picked the correct function, now you get to set up the problem and solve for X. And it's usually going to just involve multiplication, or it's going to involve multiplication and division, just depending on what part you're solving for. So now would be a great time to pause the video and do number 5 and 6 on your own. And now I'm going to quickly go over them so that you can check your work. So the proper function here to pick would have been tangent, because I have my opposite side and I have my adjacent side. Once I've solved that, I should have gotten X equals 3.9 kilometers. For number 6, the proper function you would have chosen was cosine, because I give you the adjacent side and I give you the hypotenuse. And after you've solved that, you get X equals 13.3 feet. Okay, we're going to flip to the back side of your notes, and we're actually only going to do problems 7 and 8 today. We'll leave the inverse functions for Wednesday. So to quickly go over 7 and 8, the biggest things here are you have to draw pictures. Okay, I can't even do these without taking the time to draw the picture. So please bear with me here, and we've got to create our picture. We know that with all of these, we're dealing with a right triangle. So we need to draw a right triangle. It doesn't actually matter what your right triangle looks like. We're going to fill in the pieces as we know them. So remember that C is always the right triangle, or the right angle. So if this angle is C, and you mark the angles with uppercase letters, then you know that this side length there is also C, which is the hypotenuse. Now for A and B, it actually does not matter whatsoever which one is which. So if I were to pick this one to be A and this one to be B, that means that the side opposite here would be little b, and the side opposite here would be little a. Now once I've identified those pieces, now let me plug in the numbers that they give me. They tell me that little a, or side A, is 3.8 feet. And then they tell me that the measure of angle B is 72. And which one am I solving for? C. So let's make that one X. So now that we have it set up like that, it's exactly the same as what we were doing before. If this is the angle that I'm given, this side would be the opposite side, and I'm solving for the hypotenuse. So which trig function uses opposite and hypotenuse? That's sine. So we're going to create sine of 72 equals 3.8 over x. So now let's solve for x. Wow, I made a mistake. Pause. I labeled the wrong angle. This one did not tell me that A is 72, B is 72. So when I actually set this up, apologize here, this is not the opposite side, this is the adjacent side. So if the adjacent side is 3.8 and the hypotenuse, adjacent and hypotenuse is the cosine. So the cosine, hi Lincoln. Lincoln, I'm making my video. Do you want to say hi to my students? Hi. That's your guest teacher for the day, that's Lincoln. Okay, let me hurry up and get these two problems done then. So cosine of 72 is going to be the adjacent side, which is 3.8, over x, which is the side we're solving for. So let's multiply both sides by x. So we get x cosine of 72 equals 3.8. Now divide by cosine of 72, and you get x equals 12.3. Thanks, Lincoln. Oh, thank you, Lincoln. Okay, last problem here. Where's Mr. Smith? He should be getting Lincoln right now, but he's not. That's okay. Okay, so we're going to draw our picture. And we get angle C and little c. Okay, Lincoln, I love my picture, but can you be quiet? Mommy's almost done with her video. Okay, so let's just pick this one to be A and this one to be B. So this one's B and this one's A. So we can do the angle of 49 and then the side of 13. So this one, I'm given my opposite and my hypotenuse. So opposite and hypotenuse would be sine of 49 equals 13 over c, or x. So let's solve. So again, we're going to multiply both sides by c. And gosh dang it, I think Lincoln made me make a mistake. I totally made a mistake. Because in this one, I'm not solving for C, I'm solving for A. Holy moly. Okay, let's just start over here because distractions, man. Home teaching is hard. Okay, so let's start over. Here's my right triangle. I've got big C, little c, big A, big B, little b. So angle B is 49, little b is 13, and I'm solving for A. So when I'm deciding my function, it's actually going to need to be something using the opposite side and my adjacent side. And the function that uses both opposite and adjacent would be tangent. So this would be the tangent of 49 equals 13 over x, and now I can solve for x by multiplying both sides by x, and then dividing by the tangent of 49. So I end up with x equals 11.3 kilometers. Okay, that's all for today. With your notes, please watch the additional practice for the coloring activity before you do the Math Excel problems so that you can be very confident once you're doing that.